We'd heard his surname that many times, like he did brag about it, true?
Yeah, hard.
Like he looked up to his uncle and he'd made that clear.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're examining 10 of the most famous copycats who modeled their crimes after other killers.
Я не знаю, с чего он стал таким. По-видимому, на него тоже вот это вот интернет повлиял, вся вот эта дребедень.
Peter Sutcliffe, inspired by Jack the Ripper.
As West Yorkshire police launched a second murder hunt, newspapers were already calling the killer Jack the Ripper.
Almost 100 years after Jack the Ripper terrorized London in 1888, another Ripper took to the seedy streets of England. Unlike his model, this one was eventually caught. He was Peter Sutcliffe, a truck driver who murdered at least 13 women between 1975 and 1980. Like Jack the Ripper, he primarily targeted sex workers, mostly in the red light district of West Yorkshire.
Undercover police tracked 500,000 car movements through 6 northern cities, looking for men who went looking for prostitutes in more than one red light district.
Due to the similarities of the cases, the press soon dubbed him the Yorkshire Ripper, and one famous hoaxer even sent a letter to the Daily Mail pretending to be Sutcliffe, signing it Jack the Ripper. Sutcliffe was finally caught in 1981 after a bungled investigation and was sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 2020.
It's very hard to explain to people who are not from this part of the world the effect that this started to have on people.
Hossein Amini, inspired by Ashgar the murderer. This Iranian serial killer is the most prolific in the country's history, with 67 known victims, having surpassed Ashgar the murderer. It's no surprise that he was influenced by the latter. Ashgar murdered 33 people in the early 20th century before he was finally apprehended in 1934. When asked to give a reason for his crimes, he claimed, quote, "These are the enemies of society. Because of that, I have killed them." His crime spree influenced Hossein Amini, who later cited Ashgar as an inspiration and claimed a similar motive of wanting to rid society of whom he deemed corrupt and evil. He was caught in 1962 and publicly executed the following year. Yevgeny Balan, inspired by Anatoly Onoprienko. One-upmanship is present in most industries, including, evidently, serial killing. In 1996, the beast of Ukraine, Anatoly Onoprienko, was apprehended and confessed to murdering 52 people.
They checked the man's credentials. He was 36-year-old Anatoly Onoprienko.
His infamous crime spree supposedly inspired a man named Yevgeny Balan, who desired to claim a higher body count. He didn't even come close, as he took the lives of 9 people before he was caught in September 2011. One of his victims was Svetlana Strish, Balan's own stepdaughter whom he stalked, assaulted, and strangled. He was finally caught when a boxer stumbled across a crime in progress, punched Balan, and held him down until police arrived. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The Academy Maniacs, inspired by the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs.
Что снимал? Ну, происходящее, ну, а я подошел с ножом к ней, ну, делал уже это все.
Some of the more adventurous among you may have seen the famous 3 Guys, 1 Hammer video taken by the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs, which depicts the pair killing Sergei Yatsenko. It was almost certainly seen by Russian teenagers Artyom Anufriev and Nikita Litkin. According to the press, their crimes were heavily influenced by the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs, and they in turn were given a similar moniker, the Academy Maniacs.
Ну, для меня было все равно, но как-то вот так получалось, что жертв всегда выбирал мой подельник.
The pair murdered 6 and injured 9 throughout their crime spree, which came to an end when Litkin's uncle found video evidence of a murder on Litkin's camera. They had filmed themselves just as the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs had done before them. Both were sentenced to prison, and Litkin took his own life in November 2021. Matthew Malat, inspired by Ivan Malat.
Matthew's surname is actually Muleman, but as a 14-year-old he changed it to Malat to proudly promote his family connection with the backpacker murderer.
Sometimes killing seems to run in the family. Ivan Malat is one of the most notorious killers in Australian history, having murdered 7 tourists in and around Belangolo State Forest. The case was heavily covered by the media, and a movie called Wolf Creek was modeled after the so-called backpacker murders.
Like your little mate said before, you know, that's not a knife. This is a knife.
Years later, Ivan's great-nephew Matthew Milat murdered his friend David Ochterlony, also inside Belangolo State Forest. After killing Ochterlony, he reportedly told another friend, quote, "You know the last name Milat. I did what they do." Unsurprisingly, the court later argued that he was, quote, "strongly influenced by his great-uncle," and he was given a prison sentence of 43 years.
He shows absolutely no remorse. It just makes me sick. He's just so cold-blooded, callous, and heartless.
Anushirvan Rachmanov, inspired by Vladimir Iannisyan. We return to Russia for the story of Anushirvan Rachmanov, a man suspected of killing 7 people in the mid-2010s. Decades prior, Vladimir Iannisyan killed a number of people by posing as a gas inspector. He pretended to be an employee of the Russian gas company Mosgaz, and with this guise, would enter apartments and kill the inhabitants. Iannisyan was executed in 1964. Exactly 50 years later, Rachmanov began his killing spree, also posing as a Mosgaz employee and breaking into apartments to terrorize the occupants. The press even named him Mosgaz II, acknowledging the obvious influence of Iannisyan. Rachmanov was eventually caught and confessed to his crimes, but he took his own life before he could be tried in court. Luo Shubiao, inspired by Lam Kor Wan. Luo Shubiao had kleptomania, meaning he couldn't resist stealing items and was in and out of Chinese labor camps for theft. In the late 1980s, he began watching videos of graphic violence and developed a fascination with Lam Kor Wan, a serial killer from Hong Kong who murdered 4 people in 1982. According to a confession later made by Luo, he became deeply interested in Lam's grotesque MO and developed a deep desire to emulate it. So he did exactly that. Luo murdered 18 people throughout the early 90s, often mutilating their bodies just as Lam had done before him. And with one prior murder in 1977, this brought his total body count to 19. He was convicted of his crimes and executed in 1995.
咁你究竟殺咗幾多個女人？你估下？
The Tylenol killer copycats, inspired by the Chicago Tylenol murders.
7 people were dead because someone had laced capsules of extra-strength Tylenol with cyanide. And there was fear more innocent people would die.
The greater Chicago area was struck by a horrifically random crime in the fall of 1982. Someone had intentionally laced bottles of Tylenol with potassium cyanide, leading to the deaths of 7 people. The perpetrator was never caught, and the killings both impacted sales of Halloween candy and led to the widespread adoption of tamper-resistant packaging. Unfortunately, it also led to a high number of copycat crimes. In the years following the initial incident, there were many reports of people being killed and grievously injured by tampered capsules, most of which had been laced with cyanide. This, in turn, led the pharmaceutical industry to abandon traditional gelatin capsules in favor of more modern tablets.
We want the people to be aware of this and that they probably shouldn't take extra-strength Tylenol at this time until we can find out the extent of the contamination.
Derek Brown, inspired by Jack the Ripper.
Excuse me, miss.
Peter Sutcliffe was not the only killer who modeled himself after Jack the Ripper. There was also Derek Brown, a newspaper delivery driver who, according to the courts, sought notoriety through killing. He murdered 2 women and would have likely killed many more had he not been caught. Brown was greatly influenced by Jack the Ripper and copied many aspects of his MO. One of his victims was a sex worker. He butchered both of their bodies, and most telling of all, he killed them both in Whitechapel, the same area of East London in which Jack operated. Unlike Jack, Brown was eventually caught following a thorough police investigation and was sentenced to life in prison. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Heriberto Seda, inspired by the Zodiac killer. Heriberto Seda was active in New York throughout the early 90s, killing 3 people and injuring a further 6. After each crime, he would send a taunting letter to the police and media, and would even include his own personal cryptograms. Sound familiar? Yep, it's the Zodiac all over again.
The note had basically more indications of the 3 priors as well as birth sign.
In fact, the correlations were so obvious that New York police even floated the possibility that it was the Zodiac. Funnily enough, it wasn't an investigation that brought down Seda, but a domestic dispute. Seda's half-sister called the police after he shot her in the buttocks, and Seda closed his handwritten statement with the same symbol he used in the taunting letters. Police made the connection, and Seda was thrown in prison for 230 years.
Over 6 years, Eddie Seda, the copycat Zodiac killer, stalked the streets of New York City in search of easy targets.
Can you think of any more examples? Let us know in the comments below. Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.